Good afternoon, and welcome to Day 7 of Energy Finance 2020 Online. I'm Sandy Buchanan, Executive Director of the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. Our session today is on renewables taking market share from fossil fuels. Our moderator is Carl Cates. Carl is a transition policy analyst with IEFA based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Prior to joining IEFA in 2014, Carl was an editor with the New York Times and Bloomberg LP and a consultant to the community development financial institution industry. And now let me turn this over to Carl to get us started.
Morning, everybody. Great to see you again. We're going to be talking today about the fastest moving change that has ever happened in the history of the American electricity generation industry. What's happening is happening so quickly that it's really, frankly, hard to keep up. It's something that nobody could have predicted as recently as a year or two ago. Well, what happened, what we knew a month ago has changed since that month ago. What we knew a week ago, what we knew yesterday, and even what we'll know tomorrow. This is a story driven, to my mind, by three forces. One is economics and dollars and cents. Two is shifting investor and corporate sentiment. And then three would be the long American tradition of I guess you could say, the grassroots politics of change. Our two speakers today come at it from very different places. Luis Reyes is CEO and General Manager of Kit Carson Electric Co-op in northern New Mexico, which is a breakout example that is creating a template for other co-ops to follow. Dennis Wamstead is an IEFA analyst who for years has followed energy industry developments from Washington and has a sharp daily read on developments as they occur day to day. If you have questions for me or Luis or Dennis during this conversation, we'd like to hear them. I'll walk you through the screen a little bit here. To do that, on the right-hand side of the live feed, here there's a box with three tabs. The first tab, labeled Chat, is a live discussion where you can share your thoughts and reactions with other audience members. The second tab is labeled Questions, which is where you type in questions. If someone else has asked a question that you like, click the thumbs up and that question will rise to the top of the list. We're not going to be using the poll tab in this session. With that, we'll turn it over to pre-recorded commentary by Luis Reyes and Dennis Wamstead, and we'll be starting with Luis.
I'm Dennis Wamstead. I'm an IEFA energy analyst covering the interplay between the electric utility sector and the growing resources that we call green energy, hydropower, utility-scale solar, small-scale solar, and wind power. And I also want to make the caveat here that we will be talking about coal-fired generation in the United States throughout this presentation. But my colleagues and I at IEFA believe very strongly that the coal generation transition is a precursor to the same or a very similar transition in the gas-fired generation sector. One will lead into the other, prompting or leading to a green energy transition throughout the United States and, we believe, worldwide. The graphic that you're looking at right now shows a fascinating bit of data from our Energy Information Administration, which is part of the Department of Energy here in the United States. They have been collecting and just recently started releasing data on daily generation in the United States from 2018, beginning in July of 2018 and continuing up to the present day. As you can see in the chart, there were no days from July through December of 2018 when renewables generated more energy or electricity in the U.S. than coal. And then we fast forward a little bit into 2019, and there were 38 days in the whole year when renewables topped coal generation in the U.S. Now we go a little further forward into 2020. You can see from the chart how much green there is already, and we figure that this is going to continue throughout the year. We actually just got some backup from the folks at EIA who now are projecting that renewables will generate more electricity than coal this year. And we have fast forwarded our presentation or our predictions now to say essentially the same thing, that we will see renewables generate more electricity than coal this year in the U.S., and that next year there'll be a little widening of the gap, and the year after there'll be a little widening of the gap. Coal is clearly on the decline in the United States. 3 years ago in 2017, coal generated 30% of the U.S. electricity market for the whole year. And that has steadily trended downward. Last year it was about 24%. And as you can see here on this chart, it hasn't been above 20% all year long. Now it may go up above 20% during the summer, which is traditionally a strong generation time period for the coal industry. But we don't think it'll be above 20% for the entire year, which would be, well, a continuation of a decade-long trend and a really bad marker for the coal folks. At the same time, as you can see on this graphic, the amount of generation from renewable energy is growing steadily and has now climbed above 20, 21, 22%. And just as a side note here, when we talk about renewable energy at IEFA, we're using large-scale utility solar, wind power, and hydropower. So these numbers are actually a little bit lower than they should be because they do not include small-scale solar, such as all the rooftop solar, particularly in the desert Southwest and in California. Those numbers would show a little higher percentage. They're a little harder to gather, and EIA doesn't gather them on a daily basis, so we've excluded them from this analysis. So what we see from these two graphics here is we have a trend line going one direction for coal and a trend line going the other direction for renewables. We also see that trend line speeding up in both directions. Even with the current uncertainties with the pandemic and the decline in economic activity, we project and have seen other analysis that have shown record increases coming here in solar generation in the United States and in wind power generation. The folks at Wood Mackenzie just came out with an analysis in cooperation with the Solar Energy Industries Association, saying that they expected a record amount of utility scale solar to be added to the grid this year of just under 15 gigawatts, which is, as most of you know, an awful lot of power. A similar analysis was just put out by the folks at OEA, which is the American Wind Energy Association, noting that a record amount of wind was going to come online in the U.S. grid this year as well. To top all that off, there's a huge run-up in battery storage installations across the United States, and along with that, a significant decline in the cost of battery power. And that is very important going forward because that allows the folks who run the grids to firm up the variable renewables such as wind and solar and to deliver firm power across a 24-hour period of time. We expect this to continue, these trends to continue going forward, with battery storage becoming increasingly competitive and increasingly an option as utilities look to transform the grid from fossil to green energy. So the question now in the United States becomes not if coal is going to be taken off the grid, but when coal is going to be taken off the grid. There are a number of different projections. We have issued one of our own earlier this year when we put out our outlook for 2020 coal. We projected that by 2025, which is a surprisingly short period of time from now, coal generation in the United States could fall below 10%, which would be a significant decline from where it is today and an almost unheard of decline from 10 years ago, when coal was routinely generating between 40 and 50% of the electricity in the United States. We're not alone in these projections. We might be a little more aggressive than some of our colleagues, but a very well-respected CEO of a very large renewable energy company called NextEra, you may have heard of it, has projected that there will be no coal in the U.S. grid by 2030. So we're not really off by a whole lot. The analytical team over at Moody's Investor Service has similarly projected that by the late 20s, coal will be at or less than 10% of the U.S. grid. So we are on a quick trajectory downward for the coal industry. We think it's going to happen a little bit quicker than others, but it is definitely happening. And once the coal plants are taken offline, we see the same pressures economically being transferred onto the gas-fired generation sector in the U.S. It then will become an issue of renewables taking generation market share away from gas instead of away from coal. One of the reasons we are so very optimistic are projections from outside folks that we trust greatly on the declining cost of renewable power. This graphic here is from an analyst that I follow pretty closely who's been tracking declines in the solar industry over the past 10 years. And as you can see from the graphic, we're already in a region where solar is directly competitive with existing fossil fuel generation in the United States. And going forward a couple of years, almost every area in the United States will be cheaper than existing fossil fuels, which is a very, very interesting transition and an economic, knife for the fossil fuel industry. The chart as it shows up here, there are 5 lines. The bottom 3 are the most important. The one in the middle is a green dotted line, as you can see, and that is essentially the equivalent resource, solar resource, in the state of California. So you have a current, it's already currently competitive, clearly, with fossil fuel generation, and it will continue to go down over the next 5 to 6 years significantly, so it's below the cost of fossil generation. The lower lines on this graphic will represent some of the better solar resources in the United States, in the states of Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and areas like that, and some of the global areas like the Middle East, where we've seen some record low solar purchase power agreements over the past few years. But what you really see from this chart is the continuation of cost decreases that have occurred over the past 10 years in solar here, but this has also been true for wind power. And the cost keeps going down, driven by technological innovation and economies of scale and generation. And we, along with others, fully expect that decline to continue going into the future.
My name is Luis Reyes. I'm CEO of Kit Carson Electric Cooperative, headquartered here in Taos, New Mexico. I've been with the co-op 36 years, and I've managed for 27. During my career, we've had 3 different power suppliers. Plains Electric, which was the G&T. In 2000, Plains merged with the Tri-State G&T. And in 2016, we bought out of our contract with Tri-State G&T and started buying power from Guzman Energy. One of the primary reasons that we left the Tri-State G&T family was the lack of vision from that company to really enter into renewables at a large scale. During the time with Tri-State, we only were allowed up to 5% of our energy coming from renewable resources, which was not acceptable to our membership. So in 2014, we started discussions about how do we, as a co-op led by its members, get more than 5% renewable energy. We were unsuccessful to change from within at Tri-State, so we decided to exit with the goal of becoming 100% daytime solar. And in 2016, we accomplished that. And so by 2022, Kit Carson will have about 40 megawatts of solar that's located within our system, with 15 megawatts of battery system as we create our own basically energy grid that is 100% daytime solar. In the future, we are looking at bringing wind resources into our area so that we complement the solar with the wind. So that was the overall goal. We think we're going to hit that goal with conventional resources. What I mean is the solar facilities that we're building are the same that we built across the country. We're going to buy wind from the eastern part of the state and transport it into our territory. I think it's very important to understand that there are many reasons why we went this way. Primarily, our membership wanted it. Co-ops are driven by their members, are owned by their members. Their members vote the boards in. And there was a big desire here in north central New Mexico. Basically, we live on a mountain range that's spur of the Rocky Mountains that really wants a clean environment. And so that was the first goal. The second was because it's cheaper. Today, wind and solar are the cheapest resources in this country. And then thirdly, it offered economic development opportunities to a relatively poor community. We serve 3 counties, 6 municipalities, 2 tribes. And one of our goals and challenges was, how do we get such a diverse group of people to all come behind a vision of renewable energy powering our future? And so we did that with a series of meetings. We met with our members. We met with tribal members. We met with different types of groups, environmentalists, very conservative people, to determine what is it that you want from Kit Carson when it came to power. And we actually formed a solar committee. That committee was a cross-section of our membership, and at the end of the day, they instructed the board to embrace solar energy as our fuel of energy of choice going forward. And like I mentioned earlier, by 2022, probably by the middle of next year, we will be probably the first utility in the country that has 100% of its energy generated from renewable resources located in our community. We actually operate about 17 different arrays today, so that basically every community, every member can see where they're getting their power. And so I think that's a model that we're trying to create both for other cooperatives and a model that we're trying to create for municipalities, tribal interest, and the utility world in general. I think it's important to also understand that we started this vision back around 2002 when solar wasn't cool. And so in 14 we got the chance, in 16 and today we're almost there. Some of the challenges, though, have been first the challenges from within the family. Other co-ops, other utilities were very tough on Kit Carson exiting and trying to establish this new energy roadmap. And that was pretty disheartening because I've been in the co-op program 36 years, and I think the rural electric co-op program is the best model to deliver energy. It's the most democratic model to deliver energy. And it was other co-ops who impeded our ability to do that. When we tried to get Tri-State to go from 5 to 10% or 15%, it was the other co-ops who voted against us. So I think that was primarily a challenge. That has changed, though. In the 4 years since we've left, Tri-State announced that they're going to be 100% renewable by 2030. So it's interesting that the company that challenged us, that says you could never make it happen, and as we were making it happen, decided under new leadership that it wasn't such a bad idea. I think the other challenges are being a first early adopter. We may not get all the benefits of the great low prices now. The 2 new projects we're doing today, they're going to be 2-cent power. We have some high cost power. But again, we've overcome that as we move forward by getting a resource mix of bringing some cheap wind, cheap solar, with some little higher solar, early adoptive. We our first array came on around 2009. And with the balance coming from Guzman until we're 100% carbon free, our rates are going to be around the 4-cent range for wholesale rates. So we're going to have competitive rates. They're going to be affordable rates. As I mentioned, we have a high low income, low usage, so the cost of energy is very important to making sure that the quality of life for our members is not diminished because they don't have access to energy. Clean energy. I think the other challenge that we're seeing is from a grid perspective. Our electric grids in the United States really weren't built for two-way energy flow. We're developing that, and so we've enlisted Sandia National Labs, NRail, Los Alamos, a lot of experts to help us overcome the technical challenges that most utilities that start integrating renewables are going to face. And I do think that's going to be a tougher challenge, but I think with the engineers and scientists that we have working on our team, again, our goal here at Kit Carson is to create a model, to be able to share what we've learned of the things to do and not to do when you integrate high levels of renewable penetration onto your system. The other thing that's helped us here that is both a challenge and a success is we also own and operate about 3,000 miles of fiber optic. So we really can make our system a real-time system. We can look at every single meter, every single device that's integrated into our fiber network, and we'd have the ability to offer some really dynamic tools in the future where we can offer some real-time pricing, real-time monitoring, real-time assistance to our members of how to better manage their energy. And so I think what we've done over time, starting in 2000 and today and going into the future, is really create the template for a rural, modern, smart, renewable grid. And I think the difference between what we've done and other people have done, we're actually doing it. We have fiber connected and operating. We have 20 megawatts of solar in 17 locations operating and working. We have member support. We continue to work with our members of first reassuring this is the path you want us to take, and second, letting them know where we stand and what other challenges we have. And so with that, I think we have set that template. We're on the path by hitting our targets here in New Mexico of by 2045 having a system that is totally carbon-free. And just imagine that 5 years ago, we still had people in the utility world saying that would never happen. Now I hope it's the utility world that's leading us. I think the final thing we're doing, and it's a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I think that's the way we look at all things is there are challenges, but let's take it, let's look at it of what can we get out of it. And that's the introduction of electric vehicles. If we're really going to, into our grid, if we're really going to get to that carbon-free environment where we have clean air and clean water and we manufacture with clean energy, transportation's key. And so Kit Carson currently has 13 charging stations located at our solar arrays so that when you charge, you're actually getting charges from the sun. At this time, it's at no cost. We really want to get data of how long does it take to charge, how many people will use the chargers, and once we set a data, then we'll set a rate. You can't give everything for free forever, but I think we can learn from our members how they operate, what their lifestyle is, and then we are encouraging electric vehicles. We currently are working on a pilot to start converting some of Kit Carson's vehicles to EVs, and working with the state of New Mexico to install an additional 11 chargers around the Enchanted Circle. So with that, I'd like to close in saying that renewable energy is real. The benefits are real. It is the lowest cost, cleanest energy. And it's amazing. You go in our busy life, people really don't think of energy. I think they only think of the co-op 2 times a month, when they get the bill or if the lights go out. But the rest of the time, they're expecting us to deliver a low-cost, reliable product. And so when you go into your house, and you live here in Taos, and you flip on the switch, you're probably one of the few in the country that when you flip on the switch every single day of the year, during the daytime, that energy is clean, cheap, and coming from the sun. Thank you very much.
Great presentations there by Dennis and Luis. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much. We're going to go to Q&A now. A question for Luis right off the bat here has to do with the politics of inclusion. And of course, always a challenge wherever you are. Luis, you're in a community that's really quite diverse. You talked about how there's the Native American population there. And I'm not saying these are all disparate and distinct and that there is no blend, but there's an Anglo population, there's a Hispanic population. You said there are conservatives, there's progressives, there's Taos is famous for its hippies, right, and so on. And so you said you had some challenges there, I think especially among conservatives. And I'm thinking, who are the conservatives in Taos? I think, what's that area over by Angel Fire? I think, those folks from Texas. But then I think I suspect there's also some conservatism in the Native American community. And so how did you address that and get around that?
So, Carl, good afternoon. It's great to be here. So you mentioned we do have a very diverse community. And what we did is we just went and met with people to find out what their interest was, what they wanted from the co-op, what they wanted from power supply. We found that renewables, clean energy was a big issue for us. Affordability, and so we just talked to people about their interests, and then we developed a strategy to address those. So those that were more conservative and concerned about price, our solar program brings that. Those who wanted clean air and clean water and kind of moving us forward into that carbon-free environment, we address that. With the Native Americans, conservative, but a lot of it was cultural issues. Does solar mix with their culture? And so we worked with the governor and his staff of 2 pueblos to determine and develop a solar program on one of the pueblos based around economic development. So we put tribal members to work. They get a benefit from the array because all the tribal members, in fact, get a reduction in their power bill based on the production of that array. So it took some time, but we found that at the end, we found a common thread that people wanted their say in the type of energy. So whether it was a fossil fuel or in this case renewables, by giving them a say, they help steer our course. And I think that's how we got through this. And then we shared from each group what the other group said. So our membership was very in tune to find a solution to hit our overall renewable goals.
Yeah. So Dennis, just to expand on the politics of inclusion a little bit, using the term kind of loosely here, but what I said at the outset, I said this is about dollars and cents, but it's also about preferences among corporates and among investors. And, I threw in there also the American tradition of grassroots politics. Now, so what's your take? Do you agree with my premise there that there are 3 different things happening here?
Thanks, Carl. That's a great question. Welcome, everybody. I think that is a totally valuable and accurate premise. I think what's going on in the United States right at the moment with renewables is mimicking or mirroring what Luis has experienced at Kit Carson. You have people who see that it's economically viable to do wind, solar, storage, and have a cleaner and greener electricity supply. And you have people who are pushing their local utility, whether it's a co-op or a muni or a big old investor-owned utility. And they're saying, we want you to do this. And we also have people who are pushing their corporations in general, specifically or particularly the IT sector with the Googles and the Microsofts and the Amazons, who are increasingly pushing to be 100% renewable. So you have this convergence of issues that are rapidly speeding up the transition to renewable energy in the United States. But it's definitely, there is an economic function, there is a consumer preference function, there's a corporate interest function, and everybody's coming together in one place.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things you've heard for years and years and years, of course, Luis, is that renewables cannot exist in a viable way anywhere on any scale without massive incentives and subsidies and such. Where are you at on that?
Well, in the early days, that may have been true. When Kit Carson's been doing solar since 2005, but today it can stand alone. I mean, it's going to take some time, and as tax credits expire, scale is going to help in that. So, here at Kit Carson, we created a DER system. So all our arrays are relatively small, a megawatt to 15 megawatts in our territory. The 15 megawatts program we have effectively is about 2.5 cents. If you added a subsidy, probably another couple of pennies, that 4.5 cents is still cheaper than coal is today. And that's fixed for the term of the contract. So we're able to offer low prices without the subsidy for a 25-year period. So I think it's very competitive. People can't tell the difference. When you turn on your lights, the lights shine the same way as whether it's renewable or fossil fuels. So it's reliable. So we think that the tax program, tax credits, served its purpose, but now I think they can stand on, in the next couple of years, they can stand on their own.
Yeah, yeah. Dennis mentioned there that 100% renewable goals are really part of corporate America's branding now. They're pushing it hard. The state of New Mexico actually has a renewable portfolio standard that calls for 100% renewables, I believe, by 2040. So at Kit Carson and Taos and the region surrounding it, right now you said you have 100% daylight solar power. What has to happen, or what is the likelihood that there will come a day when your utility company, your co-op, is 100% renewable? I mean, I know you got wind coming in now from the eastern part of the state. Battery storage technology is on the rise. You have a pretty strong backbone of community solar. Will there come a day when Kit Carson goes 100% renewables?
Yeah, our goal here at Kit Carson is to become carbon-free in the mid 2030, 2035. By next year, this time, Carl, will be 100% daytime solar. So every single day that the sun shines, we're bringing on storage. So that's going to help with some of the use cases. We are currently negotiating with our power supplier, Guzman, who's been a great partner of bringing additional wind and then overbuilding solar. Because I think if you use time of use rates, demand response programs, you can shift load to those solar times. And then in the future, as we were talking with Dennis earlier, hydrogen. Those type of fuels are going to make batteries longer last, or storage longer lasting. So it's going to take care of the intermittency, and that's not too far down the road. So we feel comfortable here at Kit Carson by 2030, in that time frame, we can become 100% renewable day and night.
Yeah. So when you first started this a few years ago, you were a voice in the wilderness. You were a voice in the wilderness, right? Are you still a voice in the wilderness?
No, because it was tough in the early times because being from Taos, and as you mentioned, it was considered, solar was considered hippie power, right? What are you guys doing up there in Taos? Uh,
Yeah.
and it took blazing the trail and integrating and making it work and making the price work. Now the G&T that we left, now they're touting they're going to be 50% renewable by 2024. You have co-ops looking at their portfolio to add wind and solar. You have co-ops looking at exiting their contracts so they have access to cheap renewables. So we think this is just going to continue. And we think it's a responsibility of the boards of co-ops to always look for the cheapest power for its members. That's a foundation that we're built on, is that we supply cheap, reliable power, and renewables is there. So it was tough early on, Carl, but now it's people are passing our targets, which makes you feel good because they thought we were on something a few years ago. Now they're on the same kind of a high, which is a solar high, renewable high, to hit those targets because the population wants it.
Yeah. Well, apparently they're on a similar high over in Texas. Dennis, you just were report about the uptake of utility scale solar and how it creates an existential sort of moment for Texas coal plants. So what Luis is describing is in fact occurring more broadly. And can you talk to us a little about your Texas, what you found out in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, what we found out in Texas is what we see is going to be happening across the country in the years ahead. We've had an explosion of new capacity being proposed and built in Texas, and in the next couple of years, they're going to go from about 2,500 megawatts of installed capacity to about 12,000 megawatts of installed capacity, all of which will be generating huge amounts of very, very low cost electricity during the daytime. And when it's coming online in Texas, which is a energy only market that only pays when you essentially are in the market, it doesn't pay just to be available, which we call a capacity market. It's going to be pushing somebody else out of the market, and that's likely to be at the moment coal. It could be gas if gas prices increased, but you end up in a place where you have a coal plant and you're not able to generate enough power to sell into the market to make it economic. But Texas is far from the only place where this is happening. The transition that Luis is talking about at Kit Carson is on a small scale, and that's why it's important. But it's also happening on a very large scale in places like NextEra Energy, which is driving a huge transformation in the Florida region with its Florida Power and Light subsidiary, and they are building gigawatts of solar energy and also increasingly building battery storage to do, as Luis was saying, make this a renewable resource, a 24-hour-a-day proposition. And just as Luis was saying about the price, you have the CEO of NextEra, Jim Robo, who is now basically on board saying by 2025, existing coal and gas will be priced at, or can be priced out of the market by renewable wind and solar. And they are jumping big into storage. And then, as we mentioned, they also just started to put some money behind hydrogen, which is another option for storage that you can use it on a daily basis, you can use it on a seasonal basis, and you can use it for very long-term storage. Because the production of hydrogen, if you do it with wind and solar, can be called what we call green hydrogen. And you end up with a product that it was produced through electrolysis with renewable energy. And then you have a product, hydrogen, that you can store for when you need it, which will greatly smooth out or completely eliminate the variability in renewable wind and solar.
Yeah. So to my mind, I don't know, 20 years ago, Dennis, this was almost a political partisan issue. Increasingly today, it seems to me that that's not the case. The big wind energy states, for example, are not necessarily blue states, and this notion of taking political sides has really dissipated, and this is more just really a question of good business.
Oh, it's totally a question of good business. And as Luis said, it's a good business proposition right now to advocate for and build renewable energy. It is, simply put, cheaper. And it is going to get cheaper in the years ahead. This may, I think, in some ways started out, you may be right, it could have started out as a political divide between those who wanted to keep what we had and those who wanted to move on to something else. But people are pretty smart, and people see the economics. They tell a very clear story that renewables are the cheaper and cleaner solution for the future.
A fancy question comes in over the transom here from the Applied Economics Clinic in Arlington, Massachusetts. Just throw this one to you, Luis. How can we best facilitate much higher levels of renewable integration? Battery storage will play a key role, but so can energy efficiency, demand response, and transmission upgrades. Can you speak to the best practices?
I think the facilitation is happening now. As Dennis mentioned, Kit Carson's a small player, so our model was to create best practices for co-ops and municipalities. And so we share how it is to either integrate within your system or through a purchase power buy from a large farm. So I think that model is there. It's just a matter of how much you want to pay for energy. I think as the larger utilities build big wind farms in New Mexico, a gigawatt of wind from developers that are going to be sold to public service in New Mexico and then into the California market. So I think everything is there to facilitate that. In areas that there aren't, I think it's just a lot of public education that renewables is viable. I think that's really been the knock on renewables. What happens when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow?
Yeah.
And so you integrate storage, you get prepared for different types of storage in the future. But I think everything is there to facilitate. I think it's really now a public process to educate that it is viable, and we can make an intermittent resource baseload. It's always working, and so there's a lot of models out there. I think it's for Kit Carson, it was really just doing it to show that it could be done. And then when it comes to best practices, we actually used the national labs to help us vet our program. So we used Sandia National Lab, NRAIL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. So things that maybe we weren't experts on, they vetted. And I don't know if the audience knows, but we have a tremendous national lab system that really helped us get where we're at, bringing the science and their stamp of approval was really important. So that's how we facilitated that it was real, because then we had experts says this works or this doesn't work.
Yeah. So that's probably what you just said is probably an answer to this next question I wanted to ask, which is, what you've done is something that a lot of co-ops are looking at. And I'll bet you've gotten calls from people who say, how did you do that? And is there a playbook? What's the first step? What's the second step? What's the third step?
So we did get a lot of calls, and I think I think our success has been our members' engagement, because they really steered where we wanted. We actually set up a consumer group to tell us what type of renewable. Do you want wind? Do you want solar, hydro? And so as we engaged them, they led that trail. They encouraged the board to go that way. And then from there, it's picking the right power partner. So, we exited from our power supplier because we could not get more than 5% renewable. Mm-hmm. And so we chose someone, again, Guzman Energy, that said, we'll work with you to attain your 100% goals. So I think the other thing in our kind of in our footprint or our game plan was to pick the right partner that had the similar views of energy as we did. The GNTs have served a great role to get the cost where we're at, but most GNTs were coal powered and probably some hydro in our area, but unwilling to change. This is a fast changing market, and members are changing. I think we talk, when we talk about our members, the older folks, a little tougher to convince. The younger folks, if renewables isn't in the equation, we need a new board. So I think that's what we forget too, is the millennial group. That group there really has an eye on keeping our planet clean, right? And And so, but I think it was key to the partnership and member engagement, at least in the co-op world. And I don't think an investor-owned world is different. The customers, if they tell you what direction to go, if you're listening, that's the direction you should go, and you need to make it work economically.
Yeah. Dennis, another good one over the transom here. This is from New York. How prominent a role does financing from rate players play? Let me start over. How prominent a role does financing from ratepayers play for developing renewables, either in co-ops or state-run pools? Here in New York, we're trying to get a better sense of what's possible.
Well, I think better sense of what's possible. A lot is possible. We're at a place right now, I think, where a lot of people would agree that digging out from the pandemic slowdown that we're currently in could be led by a bunch of spending to transition the electricity industry in the US, and that would obviously be led by utilities, whether they're munis or co-ops or big IOUs. Most of that would be run through ratepayers and put into ratepayer bills, but most of the calculations that we've seen and done would show that you're still going to end up saving money in the long term if you went that direction. I mean, so a lot is possible, and I know that a lot of states are thinking about, how they want to try to, improve their economies in the next couple of years. And we are currently looking at yet another semi-rescue package or something coming out of Congress that may have some enhanced financing propositions for renewable energy if it makes it out of Congress and by the fall here before the election. But if I could, I want to swing back to one thing real quick about what Luis was saying about his 100% goal for Kit Carson. I saw a question go through the chat box before about whether 100% renewables was possible in the United States as a countrywide in the electricity sector earlier. And at IEFA, we think that is completely a possible proposition. We would have said that a couple of years ago, and people might have sort of chuckled us out of the room. And I think that now people increasingly see that this kind of transition can happen. We've seen the coal industry drop from last year's 25% of the electricity market to this year's probably 18%, maybe lower. IEFA expects it to go under 10% very quickly. Other analysts expect that as well. And with leadership from the federal sector, we could push it down much quicker. And 2035 is totally a viable option. It will take leadership from the federal government because there are some areas of the country that are less driven by market forces and the transition to renewables than others. So. But definitely that transition is possible.
Yeah. I think we ought to talk about COVID for a minute here. The economy is slammed almost across the board. Every business you can think of almost is being affected by, including the utility business. The exceptions would be where the exceptions: Amazon, Google, FedEx. And down the those types of businesses. But as I say, across the board, other businesses are almost without exception are feeling some serious pain. Is there anything in your research, Dennis, that suggests to you that renewables, expansion of renewables is now at issue, at risk? Or is there anything in what you've seen in research that suggests that renewables actually might be more COVID or pandemic resistant than some industries?
Well, I would certainly vote for the former premise that you raised there. I think this is still going to turn out to be record-setting years for both the wind and the solar industry in the United States. There was some early concern when the pandemic first hit that things were going to come to a halt, and that just hasn't been the case. And I would, the reason here is, back to where we started here. Luis's members want renewable energy. Ratepayers around the country want renewable energy. Corporations want renewable energy. The technology is there. It's relatively easy to build. It's low cost, and people are pushing for it. So the pandemic may have slowed things down, in a 6-month kind of time frame, but it's not going to change the direction we're going. And I would, as I said earlier, I think this is a way that we could lead ourselves out of this slowdown, is by stressing the transition to renewables more than we have in the past.
Question over the transom. This is going for you, Luis. Xcel Energy. This is from Colorado. Xcel has a big presence up there. Xcel says it plans to get 100% of its renewables by 2050. It's probably longer term than many people expect. But it's with this particular caveat that you mentioned earlier, Luis. And it sounds like you're following a similar game plan. And so they say serving customers with 100% carbon-free electricity will require technologies not yet commercially available. What technologies are still needed or are on the horizon?
Well, and I think most utilities, I mean, that's kind of common sense. When we got into this, we knew, storage is the holy grail to really make this a 24/7. And as storage starts to get refined, our expectation, again, as we have this relationship with the national labs, is that storage will become will become better, longer lasting. As Dennis mentioned, it may be in green hydrogen, but I think it's going to come a lot faster, just as any of this technology advances have come, just in pricing. If you looked at solar 5 years ago, it could have been a dime. Now it's 2 cents. I think the same thing is going to happen with storage, or devices around storage. But and I also think that that's happening now, because if you're in the business, or you participate in the business, you see this massive expansion with opportunities for storage. And so there's someone out there, some corporation, some think tank that is developing and refining storage. So I agree with Pam's assessment, but I think it's on the horizon. And I think it's just a matter of time till it becomes commercial.
Yeah.
Carl,
interesting. Go ahead, Dennis.
I was hoping to hop in there real quick, and just the utilities have a legitimate concern about maintaining 100% reliable power, and so you get these 2050 announcements. But what's really important for the climate and for climate action is that we need to get the 80% as quickly as we can, because what matters is what happens in the next 10 years in a climate or a carbon reduction scenario. Because if we wait 30 years to get everything, because everything hasn't been developed yet, we're going to be out of luck. And so what we need to do from a sort of perspective, or analytical perspective, is have people focus on get the reductions you can get, and get them as quickly as possible, and then technology will continue to develop, and as Luis was saying, and then other options will come around, so you can get that final 10% or final 15%. But you can't. I don't think it's fair. I would not want to let a utility off the hook and say, okay, you can wait because we don't have a pathway to 100% today.
Yeah. It's interesting. 10 years ago, the bulk of the top biggest companies in the S&P 500 were oil companies, I think. Today, who's left? I think it's ExxonMobil, and then there are those other kinds of companies we talked about earlier, Google, Amazon, so on and so forth. A question comes across the transom again here, and it's asks, when will the S&P renewable or energy sector start really including renewables in the mix there? I wouldn't expect that any renewable company would be in one of the top 10 anytime soon, but when will the stock markets, the capital markets, begin to factor those sorts of companies in a more substantial way?
Well, I would argue they already are. I think that's been part of the driver in the past few years with the rise in the ESG movement, that you get companies that realize people are grading them based on how good they are and for the environment and for social causes, and that has taken a while to gain traction, but increasingly I think it's becoming recognized as a driving force. And we've run some stories at IEFA in the past 6-9 months about how the environmentally focused funds on Wall Street have been doing much better than the oil and gas heavy funds on Wall Street. Going forward, the options, you can still invest in both, but you're going to make more money if you invest in the environmentally focused fund.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how this is an increasingly non-political sort of question. We're going to run out of time here, but let me just throw this in as the last one. Do you think it matters who's president?
I don't know if either Luis or I want to answer that question, but my answer would be that I think the markets are going to dictate the transition to renewable energy. It's really all about the dollars and cents, and the dollars and cents are pushing renewables.
Yeah, and Carl, I agree. All politics is local. The federal issues don't impact us as much on a day-to-day basis, and so everything we've done have been with local support, local generation. We did this prior to the state of New Mexico passing a portfolio standard. We did it because it was the right thing and economic to do. I think the business case is going to drive more than who's sitting in the White House.
All right, guys, thanks for talking. We're out of time. We're going to throw it back, assuming the technology works. And I want to point out here that this is a workable sort of conversation model. You got Luis up in northern New Mexico. I'm down here by El Paso. Dennis is in Washington. Our producers are in Florida, New York, and somewhere else. And Sandy Buchanan, who we're going to send it back to right now, is in Cleveland, Ohio. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will continue the conversation. You can do that with each other on this swap card site. You can also join us on Twitter at hashtag IEFA 2020. We are now in a minute going to play for you the next in our series of videos on local leadership, global change. We are featuring the remarkable work of Indigenous climate action in Canada, led by Executive Director Ariel Deranger. So we hope you'll stay and watch that. It takes about 10 minutes. And we also hope you will join us back here tomorrow at the same time for the next panel called Under Pressure, the impetus for overbuilding pipelines and how to stop it. Thanks again and goodbye.
Eklanete Denesotlaneta Arieltsa Ekwe Hushe Deranger Betsiani Hesli. My name is Arieltsa Ekwe Deranger, and I'm a member of the Athabasca Chippewan First Nation and the Executive Director and co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action. Indigenous Climate Action is Canada's first Indigenous-led climate justice organization. And the mandate and the vision of our organization is to empower and inspire Indigenous communities to be sovereign and self-determining nations and building their own Indigenous-led climate action strategies across the country. One of the most compounding and intersectional issues in social justice is climate justice. And in Canada, or so-called Canada, there are many Indigenous peoples working on issues that could support climate solutions, but are often not looked at or supported in that way. So how do we look at Indigenous climate action as viable solutions for tomorrow? We have unique rights of Indigenous peoples that have been defined under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which looks at our collective rights as communities, but also our collective rights in relationship with the natural world. And so Indigenous rights come with their own very tangible connection to ecosystems, landscapes, and places in which we have come from. The word dene in my language, when you break it down in its root form, means to flow from the land. So we have these unique systems, but those systems and values haven't been included in the way that we look to frame economic systems, systems of modern governance, education, and so on and so forth. And as the climate disaster has increased, so have many of the injustices towards Indigenous peoples. Not being able to access clean, healthy water because many of our communities are still connected to the land. My community, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, until about 30 years ago was 80% subsistence. 80% subsistence. And the only reason that number has decreased is because of the imposition of oil and gas projects within our territory and the contamination and degradation to our ecosystems, making those subsistence foods unsafe to eat.
I grew up in the boreal forest, so we were very land-based people. When I was a kid, 70% of our food came from the land. So we ate, wild chickens, rabbits, ducks, deer, moose. We also picked a lot of berries. And our water. We got our water from the ground. I'll never forget how clean and fresh and cold that water was. Experiencing the changes, being really land-based, to all of a sudden we have water being hauled to us, this treated water that tasted like bleach. I understood that there was changes happening.
So Indigenous climate action was really born out of this need from Indigenous communities to see themselves as a part of addressing the climate crisis. For about 15 years, I was working within the environmental and climate justice movement in so-called North America. And there weren't a lot of Indigenous peoples leading these conversations, participating in these conversations. And yet our communities were often asked to give words or share their knowledge. But they weren't being included at some of the highest levels of discussions, but rather we were just there to talk about how bad climate change was for us. It's kind of like that sort of victimization model. And so in 2015, I leaned on a lot of friends and allies, put together an advisory council, and formed the first inaugural meeting for Indigenous climate action in January of 2016, which brought together about 150 Indigenous representatives from across the nation to discuss climate change with some of the leading Indigenous voices in climate justice, like Tom Goldtooth, Art Manuel, Winona LaDuke, Ellen Gabriel, Chief Stuart Phillip, all these really incredible voices that have been participating in the UN Forum Convention on Climate Change, that have been participating in many UN dialogues, as well as national and regional policies on climate change, to show folks we are a part of the conversation and we do have value in these conversations. At the end of 2017, it became like a full-fledged organization, because between 2015 and 2017, it was all volunteer. I had another full-time job and I was doing it off the side of my desk. I took a leap of faith. I quit my job where I was working for my First Nation, and I decided to help steer the ship of what has now become Indigenous climate action.
Ariel is one of the most powerful people that I've gotten the pleasure of meeting in my life. I met Ariel a few years ago at the Indigenous Climate Action gathering that we had out in Cold Lake First Nations, where I'm from. We really got to know each other when we went to Ecuador together to bear witness to the Warani case to protect 500,000 acres of Amazon rainforest.
5% of the global population is Indigenous peoples, but we protect and steward 80% of the world's biodiversity. We are the protectors of the land.
The Reject Tech campaign was a huge one. They were creating this mega project in the north.
We already had issues with how much fresh water was being used, how much land was being cleared, how much air pollution was happening, deforestation. And then all of a sudden comes a company like Tech saying that they're going to be the biggest project to date.
The project was this massive project in an area that had been completely untouched, basically for millennia. There is nothing up there, no development, no transmission lines, no roads, nothing. And they started doing exploration drilling for the Tech Frontier mine. And in order for this project to be developed, they would need to develop a bridge that got across the river to the area. They'd have to develop roadways and systems. They'd have to pull in transmission lines so that they could power the operations or build a power station. They would have to build an airstrip. They would have to build in a massive amount of infrastructure just to power one project. For fighting this project, it became about how do we create awareness? How do we get more information to ensure that people understand that this project is, in fact, moving us in the wrong direction? When we can take information from institutions like IEFA, bring them to the table and say, this isn't just about us being angry that we can't hunt, fish, and trap, but this is about a project that is not economically viable and that is being criticized as part of an international movement that we need to move away from fossil fuels, period. End of story. Like, these are our allies in this movement. And so we took it upon ourselves to make tech one of the biggest issues of the UN COP meeting. So the UNFCCC COP 25 in Madrid. We ran this campaign at the COP. We called it Reject Tech. We asked Canada to reject the Joint Review Panel recommendation to approve the project and ran this campaign for a few months.
There was a lot happening, and we were really trying to figure out the different ways that the minister might take it. If he was to approve, if he was to deny, and if he was to approve with conditions. We were thinking about trying to head out to Ottawa and do some lobbying. There's plans underway for different kinds of direct action. We saw the group Extinction Rebellion do a National Day of Actions.
There were protests happening all over the place. People were pretty upset about this project. And as Canada continued to sit on whether or not they were going to approve, Tech came forward and just said, you know what? We're going to reject ourselves because they realized that, in fact, just like many of the IEFA reports had stated and other reports, that this was not an economically smart investment, that this was a project that had a lot of contention around it, and that it was no longer in their best interest to move forward with the project, and the project was canceled.
That pristine forest up there is going to be pristine for a lot longer now. So that's a beautiful thing.
There's just so much knowledge we have because we are in the communities on the water all the time, not just to go for a hiking trip or a camping trip. We live there. So we know the land and the history of the land. I really encourage people to take the time to learn more about Indigenous rights, because Indigenous rights is tied to protecting the land. And if our Indigenous rights are protected, it ensures that you have an existence, that your kids have a future, because we're working hard to protect the land, not only for us, but for everybody.
We still have an opportunity to safeguard what's left. And we can do that together with allies and partnership and empowering our communities to really pave the way for what an Indigenous climate justice future looks like, which isn't just about, making sure we've reduced the greenhouse gas emissions or have solar power, because we need all of those, but it also must include what it means to be in relationship with the land, to be dene, to flow from the land.